live. It's our first Facebook Live event, so we hope that the sound is actually happening. We'll find out later. But one of the things that we want to talk about tonight is housing and childcare, which when I talk to people in the ward, when I talk to people at events, it's one of the defining challenges, I think, for the district, is figuring out a way to make this a place that's affordable for people to move to, for people to raise their families here, and for people to age in place here. And when we think about housing, it's one of the most unaffordable places to live in the country. It's also got some of the highest child care costs in the country. And that is a pre-pandemic challenge. We have some big challenges that are pandemic related, but child care housing, those are things that were systemic, deep problems that people talked about, acknowledged, but didn't really make much progress on for many years, especially in this part of the city where housing is frequently obstructed, frequently delayed. I represent an ANC district that is extremely dense, that has a lot of apartments. We are right next to a single-family neighborhood, and one of the things that my district does is it allows for there to be foot traffic at the little shopping area in New Mexico. It creates the possibilities for restaurants right next to a low-density neighborhood. Everyone benefits from having different types of housing in neighborhoods. It's not something that needs to be the source of so much conflict. And yet, in my district, in the broader ANC, we have 0 affordable housing units, 0. And the reason is not because no one's trying to build buildings that have inclusionary zoning units. It's just that those types of developments, which are larger, are delayed and are stuck in litigation for years. And so that is, I think, we have got to build more housing in Ward 3, and that is one of the main reasons I'm running. The other thing that we have to do is we have to make childcare affordable, and there's a long-range plan for that, and there's a short-term plan for that, but we have got to be serious about it. And then the last thing, and then I want to introduce our guest, who I suspect is the main reason a lot of people are here. We have an opportunity, or I would say maybe a challenge. Mary Shea, some people, there are things you might agree with her on, some things you might disagree with her on, but the thing I will say about her is that she's an independent legislator. She thinks for herself and is serious about the policy issues facing the city. And we have a problem at the council with a lot of members who, in a one-party city, the smart thing to do is to keep your head down, don't make news, don't ask questions that embarrass people, don't hold people accountable. And the result of that is we have agencies that are allergic to transparency. They don't answer questions. They don't feel the need to explain why they're not delivering the services that they should be. So on schools, for the parents who are in the audience who know this, but for others, if you drove around Ward 3, you would see tents outside of private schools where kids were learning outside in 2020 and in 2021. That wasn't happening at public schools. Not because teachers were opposed to it, not because the union was opposed to it. In fact, teachers were asking for it. It just didn't happen. And no one has made the chancellor explain why. And that's because the council doesn't want to touch things that are political footballs. They don't want to show courage on them. And that, I think, is a major question for folks. We need a council member who's independent, who is going to think about these things thoughtfully. And as you think about that, I hope that I could be that candidate for you. That's one thing. Just water. Just switch glasses. Sorry. Thank you. But turning to the main event, it's my profound pleasure to introduce Matt, and we're going to have a brief discussion. I'm going to make sure he has a chance to say hello. About 10 years ago, I was an intern at Big Progress for a summer, and there was this really big-name writer guy, and he had this Battlestar Galactica poster up on his desk and sitting right there. And the thing that, when people are like, what's it like to work with Matt Yglesias? He is incredibly smart. Everybody who follows him on Twitter, or reads it, knows that. He has opinions about everything, which does get him into trouble, I would say sometimes. But he's really an interesting guy, and that's why I'm so excited that he's here. He also has been thinking about the two issues that I just talked about housing and about childcare and about families for a long time. And I think that is a crucial thing that's missing in our policy discussion. Being a parent is a really important job, and it doesn't get enough support. And as a country, there are so many different ways that that's true. But thinking about that lens of how can we make it possible for all families to thrive, that's so important. And I know that Matt has been a real thought leader on that. And so I'll turn it over to Matt Yglesias.
Hi, well, thanks guys for coming out, bringing the rain, the pandemic, everything else, the traffic. I'm just really excited to be here. Something I've been telling people for years that they should be more involved in local politics and in local policy. So I'm really excited to be able to do that. One of the oddities of journalism is it's considered like unethical to actually be like involved in racism in a real way, even though you comment on the issues and on the people who are there. And so I'm glad in the current independent position I have that I can like just say that like I think Ben is the right choice for this race. I think that I think that there's been a real DC politics has been in a weird state, I think, for years, where if you ask anybody on the council, on the ANC, aspiring, they're all like, oh yeah, like we need more housing. Like there's nobody who is like avowedly against increasing housing production, and yet somehow it keeps not happening because there's always a caveat or a but or a this or a that or the other thing. But there actually is a consensus. Like everybody knows that we need to execute on this. No one is saying, oh, the housing affordability situation is fine. But the question is like, who is going to do something about it? And that's why I love the boldness and the energy of this campaign and of Ben's vision, because that's really what we need is just challenge, the different stakeholders in the city to deliver on what everyone is agreeing we need to do on these kind of topics. I think especially as I become a parent and I'm trying to see kids here, and especially Ward 3 is known as the sort of most family-friendly part of the city. It has the most desirable schools. It's where people sort of want to come to raise kids, but then is that really possible, right? And how can we make this a city that, so many of us moved here in our 20s, things like that. There's a lot of great opportunities. There's a lot of great attributes to this city. But people want to grow up here. People want to be able to age here. They want to be able to raise their kids here. They want their kids to be able to live here. And how do we create a city that makes that possible? So thank you guys. Thank you, Ben.
All right. Should we sit down maybe?
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone will be aware of that. I think you need to move over a little bit, Matt, on the Facebook, the iPad. Yeah. So I hope folks can still see me. Maybe they can't, but so I wanted to start with a kind of focus on the question you just touched upon on the housing issue. And as I was thinking about kind of what we should talk about, I was looking at some of your writings, and I came across a piece you wrote at the end of the presidential election in Vox about building more housing. I didn't tell him about this, so he's trying to remember what he wrote. But one of the things that you talk about is that obviously there's the potential for dynamism if we do that, if we build more housing, if we undo some of the racist exclusionary policies that result in some of the land patterns. The other thing you touch on at the end is this issue of sort of non-market housing. And one of the things that I find frustrating as a candidate is that there is this divide that exists in some people's minds that you are either someone who is for market rate housing and that the solution to the housing crisis is just building more through the market, or you are someone who rejects that. That's just luxury apartments, and you're just in favor of non-market solutions like social housing and land trust. And you make the argument that those things don't have to be in tension, but I sort of was curious, how you plan on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people can often get very abstract and sort of ideological in their view of these things, and someone might say, oh, I'm not like a leftist, all I really care about is public housing or non-market housing. And what they need to understand is the sort of where the rubber hits the road in local land use politics, and this is what you know as an ANC commissioner, right, is that there isn't some special universe in which, well, if it's social housing, if the government, if the DC Housing Authority said, well, we want to do this, then it can happen, right? There's just a question of what is the zoning, what is the permit process, who has a right to raise an objection, and what form is that, how long does it take to execute on? And, if we want to create more pathways for nonprofit builders, if we want to create inclusionary zoning, if we want inclusionary zoning units to get built, rather than we want to use inclusionary zoning rules as an excuse not to build, then, we're looking at sort of one set of issues. And I mean, I guess I'm curious what you see on the ANC, because I always wonder, I mean, like, is it true that it's more politically palatable to get something built if it has an affordable component? Because that's always my sort of question. It's like, what are we really doing?
Yeah. So I'm the chair of ANC 3D, which, for those of you who don't know, is Palisades, Spring Valley, Wesley Heights, Vauxhall Village, which, if you look at the census map, is the wealthiest part of the district, has the highest land use prices if you're buying a home. And it is true that I don't think that there's a lot of appetite for affordable housing. There's not a lot of appetite for housing in general. I'll be candid about that. But when people talk about building multifamily buildings on MacArthur Boulevard, for example, which is something we are talking about more frequently, the main complaint is, well, there's no transit, which is true. But there is a transit, and that is a huge problem. And linked to this conversation. But the other issue is people are going to say things like, those are people going to be comfortable? Right? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. We don't have services for people, which, when you're talking about certain types of tenants, the services question is relevant, but for other folks, that's really just a pretty clear code for the language. But, I think your other point about there not being a distinction, the approval process is true. It all kind of funnels through. There are differences, and it is true that I think rhetorically you'll see people more willing now, which is I think a sign of how much people can't be in denial of some of these things. There is rhetorically a lot more talk about we need to have affordable housing from people who you would suspect taking that position. But there isn't necessarily a lot to back that up. And the Wardman, which is on Connecticut Avenue, a very huge hot button issue in the community right now. And there are folks whose main complaint is that it doesn't have more housing. That's sort of one perspective, just generally. And then there are people whose complaint is that it's not all affordable housing. But if you dig deep into that, there are people within that group who they want all affordable housing, but they don't want any more housing than exists. Because they don't want it to change, they don't want more density on a building that's right next to a metro station. It makes very little sense. So I completely agree. I think but that is the tension, and we have an opportunity, I think, now to elect a council, me, but also there's other people on the ballot for other races, to push forward on some of that and stop the politics of just talking about issues, which is the key right.
So can I ask you about downtown?
Sure.
I know this is something you've given thought to. I mean, this is a big issue. I mean, I go running in the mornings and I get downtown and it's not, what it used to be, and it's a big issue, I think, kind of for the city. And one obvious thing people say is, well, we have all this office vacancy downtown and we have all these housing affordability problems. Can't we find a solution there? And I mean, I don't think that's the entirety of the solution, but But there's something to
Yeah,
that.
well, there is. So, I mean, the council is looking at, to their credit, they're looking at how can we make the office to residential conversion process, like how can we square out the math? Because I think the problem is, you still make more money renting office space. And that is like, at the end of the day, a crucial problem. Also, some of these buildings are physically difficult to convert. If you talk to people that say, you know, think about an office floor plan, there aren't bathrooms in every office, right? The bathrooms are in the center, and it's not really conducive to economical transition. Not a good way to live, but it would be expensive to sort of build out that plan. But it's not impossible. And it is a place where, you know, when we talk about tax incentives, that could be a place to target that. But I think, you know, it's not going to be the only solution, and that means we have to kind of have a more long-term perspective, which is difficult for a challenge that is so existential, right? You know, we can't redesign downtown into a walkable place where people live in the next 4 years. But it is one of the biggest challenges facing the city. Because people, you know, I didn't go into the office today because a bunch of people were, I'm going to work from home today. I had this, and I had another meeting, and I'm going to work from home today. And my office, we're not going in 5 days a week. We're never going to go back to 5 days a week. And that is, you know, part of it though. I have a question about this, and I kind of was opposed to you. Was, you know, you hear people say when you look at downtown, and they hear us talking about, oh, let's turn these buildings into housing. The response that I get sometimes is, see, cities are not where people want to live. People want to live in the suburbs. The housing crisis is going to be solved because the pandemic showed that no one wants to live in apartments. They want to live out there. So we don't need to talk about densifying low-density areas or adding housing because, you know, cities are not coming back. And I don't think that's true, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, you know, I mean, this is a tough problem, right? I mean, it used to be, you know, before the pandemic, 3 and 4 years ago, it was just overwhelming demand to live in DC. And the way the government processed that was like, this is a crisis. It's like, what will we do? Too many people want to live here. We don't know how to accommodate them. Everything is so terrible. And then we saw over the past year, I mean, there was a reduction in demand within the city associated with the pandemic, associated with the lack of office funding. And you realize, wait, that could actually be a much worse crisis, right? What we don't want is a situation where the population falls, the sales tax revenue in the town falls, we still have to meet our pension obligations. So the taxes go up, but the services don't get any better. So then fewer people want to live. Right? I mean, you really don't want to solve the housing affordability problem by making the city be a place people don't want to live. Sure. Right? So right now, well, there still is demand for living in the city. Yeah. I think we want to accommodate that demand because that stabilizes the tax base. It makes sure that our businesses have customers. And then you can do the things like, I think, you know, people don't live in the District of Columbia just in order to commute downtown, right? I mean, you can commute from the suburbs just fine. Some parts of the suburbs are more convenient than some parts of the city. Sure. But the city has a lot to offer, you know, in terms of its lifestyle. And so we want to get, I think, out of the mentality of saying, well, we're going to turn people away, or we're going to look down our noses at people's desire to live here. We need to be welcoming to that and build on the, you know, the incredible strengths that we have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. You know, this is the nation's capital. We should want it to be this you know, amazing place that attracts people from all over the world, all over the country to live here. And it is that already. Like, we don't need to, you know, do much work to make that happen at a certain level. But one of the things I think about the affordability issue on childcare and housing and on transit, it goes to how can we make this a city that's more attractive for people to come here and stay here, which I think is a huge problem. I have a lot of friends who moved here in their 20s and are now, they have bigger homes or they have a home out in the suburbs. or they're able to afford childcare out there, or whatever the reason is. And so bringing people in to make it affordable, and also I think it goes to like design. Walkability is thrown around a lot as a kind of slogan, focused mainly on safety, which obviously is, right? Making places where you could walk and not be afraid that you're going to be hit by a car. If you've ever been to Florida, you go to Jacksonville, it's like the antithesis of walkability. There are sidewalks, and you see people walking in like a 5-lane road to get to the bus stop, and we don't want to do that, right? That's not a good, that's, it's the largest city in America, it's just strong. But how to get there, it requires strategic thinking, it requires investment in kind of small things, which is something that, like as an A&C commissioner we do, like just looking at what does a sidewalk look like? Are we building sidewalks? When we talk about buildings, a lot of focus is on, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Aesthetics are people who want to build more housing. Often, when they hear people talk about how a building looks, they cringe because they think here what's coming is someone telling me, an excuse for why we can't build more apartments near them. But aesthetics are not unimportant, right? Things that are ugly are not great. They're going to be there a long time. And if we care more about design, about making it so buildings are inviting on the first floor so that you can walk around and feel like you're in a place that's alive, that's a place you want to live. That's something I think about.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, there is an externality in that sense, right? I mean, if my little front yard space looks nicer, everybody on the block kind of benefits, and, if retail, looks nice, that's good for everybody. Ugly stuff is not so good. So childcare. Yes, it's come up a couple times. Yeah, this is such a, my son is 7 now, so we're out of the line. But like, what do you do? I mean, it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money, right? So I'll start with just like a personal statement. I live in DC because of universal pre-K. If there wasn't universal pre-K, I don't think we would live here. We thought about it when my son was born September 29th, which is the day before the cutoff. So that's a $25,000 thing at least that he saved us by coming then. And people, I talk very strategically, but there are a lot of, if you talk to people who have September babies, they think about those things because the costs are massive. And there are a few things on that 0 to 3 period. There is legislation that exists currently, the Birth to 3 Act, that has a healthcare component. It has an early childhood educator component about sort of, it's kind of I think one of the problems with it is it speaks to a lot of way we do a lot of things. It's a convoluted funding mechanism where we are raising salaries by paying, we're sending money to the centers. In return, they're going to raise the salaries. It's going to happen kind of you want to backdate the salary. It's not the way people really want to live. They want to have a good salary all the time and have that be consistent and not something that is dependent upon people lobbying the council at budget time. So that's something. But the other element of it is to cap expenses at 30%. And that's not fully funded. It's not a reality. I think that's important. Everybody in the race will say, let's fully fund Birth to 3, but they stop there. And I think that's a huge problem, because if you think about it, 30% of your income on childcare, and then let's add housing. How much is rent? How much is a mortgage payment? We're still getting up to what? At best, 50-60%, maybe it's higher, and for a lot of folks it's higher. And then if you pile in like a student loan payment, which a lot of people have, then the math doesn't work. It still doesn't work. So that's why I have on my platform a very ambitious idea. Let's expand public education in the district down to the toddler years and then to the infant years. And let's do it in thank you.
let the parents know that that will be a life changer for people. It will be something that will accelerate our economy, and it will just improve outcomes for kids. Because kids will be able to go to high quality childcare taught by someone who's employed by the public school system, who's paid a good salary, who meets those qualification standards. And that's a big thing, right? That's not something we can do over time. But, we did that with pre-K-4. We did that with pre-K-3. And with kindergarten. Schools in the district and across the country, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, kindergarten was not a thing in a lot of states. Now it's everywhere. Pre-K-4 is still not a thing in a lot of places, but it will be soon. It's becoming a norm and an expectation. And so we can't let the fear of big things, which was actually my question created, that there's this fear of talking about big ideas that you can't do right away. Just because you can't do something right away doesn't mean you can't start working on it. You shouldn't set that as a goal. Let's do it with school and more aid and grow it just the way we do pre-K-4. So that's my answer. But I think that's an ambitious goal. But the short term, the council has in its power the ability to fully fund birth to three, which will help a lot of families.
No, I think that's absolutely the right vision. And, I agree. Pre-K, universal pre-K has been transformative to my family's life, but also I see to my neighborhood, which is in Ward 2, to be fair. But it has gotten so many people who, might have left town to instead stay and enroll their kids in CPS and to then get involved in their school PTO in the system and build a stronger school system for everyone. And I also think, right, it's easy, some people of a more progressive ilk will sort of deride market rate housing as like, well, why do we need that? Or, a great idea, like a great progressive idea, like real public education starting at age 1. The problem with that is it's expensive. But the way you could have more revenue is to grow the city's tax base, right? You could imagine a future vision of the city in which there is much more market rate housing. There's people living in it. They are earning income. They are spending money. That is being plowed into better public services. And the district, I think, with pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, have been a model for national change in the New York City that is maybe going to pass Congress more. But it's something we really, I think, DC has not been accustomed to being a leader like that so much over the years, but on pre-K, we really have been, and we could be in a bigger way. In part, we don't have statehood, but unlike most American cities are so under the thumbs of state legislatures, and because we have that unified single-tier government, can actually be much bolder in our policy experimentation than a Chicago or Los Angeles or something like that.
I think that laboratory of democracy idea is it's such a good point, because we really can be innovative and be a demonstration project for so many things, big things, small things. There's a ranked choice voting. There's a big debate about that. So a little digression. And this race, there's 9 candidates. I think it's pretty obvious why ranked choice voting would be positive. Why it would be positive for our politics, because there are real divisions within the Democratic Party in DC, but it's hard sometimes to have that work out in a way that makes sense because of a first past the post system. But more importantly, and I made this point in my testimony, as a really extreme partisan Democrat beyond DC, ranked choice voting, if that was in place 20 years ago, Al Gore would have been president. John Kerry would have been president most likely. Hillary Clinton would definitely be president. We would have won so many more Senate seats. Because if you look at it, Democrats are usually the ones who are hurt by some of these third party voting. It's not always the case, but it is something that happens. And that, there's this resistance in DC from the DC Democratic Party as an institution to ranked choice voting because it will disrupt the way things are, the way we've been doing it. And that's disappointing because we could show some leadership and show that it can work. As New York did and didn't do, but I think we could show that it can be done without any kicks. Yeah, you know what? I think I lost my train of thought very briefly. My digression, but yeah, it's great questions. I found it right, and I think it's a good point. On the tax point and on the impact of some of these social programs, there's such this, well, if you're for these things, then you're for raising taxes. And I answer the question about taxes, maybe. I'm not going to say I'm going to be raising taxes. I'm not going to say I'm against it, because that's not the way these discussions really play out. It's about, if you want to raise it, there's X amount to pay for that. That's a conversation we can have, right? But there are alternatives to being able to pay for these programs, and one of them is that they can pay for themselves by making the city more attractive, by making it more dynamic, by making it possible for single parents to work if they want to work, and making it possible for people who earn an income taking care of our children, which a lot of them don't right now. They don't earn a living wage. So, and that has a cascading impact. I think that is a crucial point. The other point I'd say that I want to quickly mention about childcare. It's a small thing, but I think it speaks to something that the way I approach this. Minnesota has this pretty cool family education program where every family can go to parenting classes. You at your school, the neighborhood school, and it's run by the school system, and you meet the principals, you meet the teachers as parents with infants. And what happens when you do that for a couple of years is parenting is hard. It's really hard. They can be difficult, and not everybody knows how to do it, and that's important. You shouldn't just view parental support as something that happens when people need to be punished, when people have done something wrong, because everybody needs help. The other thing is that it brings people into the school system. It makes them familiar with it, makes the schools familiar with them, and I think that having worked in a low-income school in Texas before I became an attorney, one of the things that happens is that a lot of parents are disconnected from the system, and the system doesn't do a very good job of reaching out to them, and it's hard work. Some people have jobs and can't come to parent-teacher conferences, so creating those opportunities that bring people in to make neighborhood schools the center of our community, a place where they should be open at night. It should be where the bridge club is, the church club is. That's the possibility we should be thinking about. I don't know what that is, but I think the other thing I had on this on my list here that we talked about, that I know you tweeted about, is the idea of big things. As a country and as a city, we're allergic to them. As people make a point about public schools, you propose the idea, if there weren't public schools now, and I came and said, I want to provide free education for every kid, even the millionaires' kids, people would say that was crazy. Or they would point out all the problems with it, right? They would be afraid of it. If you said, I want to build trains that go under the city, if there weren't subways, if that wasn't a thing, people would say that's crazy. People still say that's crazy, right? To build more. And so how do we deal with that? The fear of big things as a country, as a city, what do we do?
Louder. No. I understand. This is, we were talking about, the pandemic and remote work and downtown and things like that. And people need to realize that things are going to change. Sort of no matter what we may think of, right? Urban America suffered tremendous dislocation in the post-World War II years.
Sure.
When cars came in, it's a tremendous technology, but it's probably not in suburbs. Then there was another change. Living in the city became more fashionable here, and that produced some pressure. Now we have new technologies, new remote work, and that's producing change. And so stuff is going to happen, right? No matter what we say or do. Or people have tried to preserve neighborhoods. They say, well, we want to keep the the neighborhood the same by not building it. The neighborhood I grew up in, which when I was in New York, when I grew up in, it was like a kind of like fun. We had a lot of college students, professors, intellectuals. Now it's all hedge fund managers. And that's because they said, well, we're going to keep the neighborhood the same by not building anything. But it changes, right? The world changes, so we need to adapt. And we need to shape change. And we need to say, as a democracy, right, as citizens, we elect officials to manage change and choose the direction that we want for the city. And I think you have, an appealing vision of things being different from how they are now. And I think a lot of people in politics will sort of want to say, well, I'm going to solve problems, but we're going to solve the problems without anything changing. Right? They're like, well, we're going to tackle poverty and inequality and climate change, but also nothing new will be constructed, and everything will look exactly the same. And like that doesn't make sense when you think about it, right? And I think, if you ask the people living in this city, like, what are their political values? Their values would say we need to change them. We need to tackle injustices. We need to address big problems. And so it's like, yeah, then we need solutions that are matched to that, right? I don't hear anybody saying, well, actually, everything's probably fine, so we shouldn't do anything. People can perceive that there are problems, right?
Sure.
And so then, well, we need to do something.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, the fear of I think of making a mistake, of going too bold and then blowing up. It makes sense. I mean, that is a big thing to be afraid of. But there are such big challenges that we have to meet the moment in order to overcome it. And on the change point, I make the point. Neighborhoods are living things because people live in them, right? And so they change. They change sometimes in negative ways. They change sometimes in positive ways, in ways you can't imagine. And historic preservation, which is an issue that is coming up a little bit in the race, there's a tendency to say, well, if you care about history, then you need to have strict historic preservation laws. And then there's a kind of approach where if you care about people, then you have to be against historic preservation. I think that, both of those are kind of a little bit silly. But the way in which we have to think about these things is we have to kind of acknowledge that sometimes the conventional wisdom in the planning community is not correct, right? Penn Station should not have been destroyed. That was a big mistake, right? Building highways through the cities, we look back, not such a great idea from our vantage point now. So I think it makes sense to have skepticism of that. But at the same time, the notion that we have dead hand control, it's really problematic. And we see that in some of our neighborhoods that people, they bought their home 40 years ago and they have regular jobs. And the people who are buying it don't have regular jobs because those are the people who can buy those homes now. And nothing has changed about the home. Right? It's the same thing. But the people, a government worker can't buy that house anymore. And that's not a neighborhood being preserved. Right? That's architecture being preserved, but not a neighborhood. So I think maybe we can open it up to questions and start over here and we'll pass it around.
Hi, my name is Ron Osmali. I was wondering, so say DC liberalized land use super aggressively and you allow duplexes, apartment buildings everywhere, how would you scale up the education system to go along with it? Because schools is a big issue people bring up. I'm very pro UV of just building more houses, but how would you get the Department of Education to go along with that?
I guess I'll take that first unless you want, Matt. So I think that is already an issue in Ward 3. You'll hear people talk about school overcrowding and the need to address it. So I think the answer is we have to build more schools and invest in schools. Like that is part of it. I think the other thing about schools is the DC public school system is a kind of weird situation because Ward 3 has all this overcrowding, has that's a huge problem. Kids at Key Elementary, which is in the Palisades, they have timed lunch that has to be silenced so the kids can be moved out in 15 minutes. That's not great, right? They don't have facilities to do extracurriculars, art, music, that's just not possible there. And also, more, I think critically, special education services are not delivered in the way that they should be in Ward 3 public schools because there isn't space for that. And so those kids have to go far away, and maybe they would have gone to that school far away anyway, and go to a charter school that's more attractive, but they don't have the choice to stay in their neighborhood school. So I think that's a problem. The other thing, though, is that there is under-enrollment at other public schools in the city. Because even though we've made a lot of progress, it's still the case that a lot of parents in the district don't have confidence in the quality of the education their kid will receive at their neighborhood school. So those kids want to come to more schools for a good reason, and people want to move here for a good reason because of the school. So that is also part of it. Like we have got to figure out how to go to the next level in the kind of improving, performing our schools. We've gotten, I think, not to say that we've tapped out the results that we're going to get from having just high expectations, but we've got to think about how do we keep teachers in the classroom and grow them and make them successful in those schools where there's so much pressure to succeed and there's a lot of churn because it's a hard place to work. That's got to be part of the conversation. But back to your point, I think building schools will be something we have to do, as will be other things, building other infrastructure as the population grows. But you have people, it also takes for this because they will have to be protected.
Thank you, Ben. Just sort of following up on the question. If we do get more housing and more schools, we'll need more transportation infrastructure to support all that. So I'll make this quick. I want to get both of your thoughts, or any one of your thoughts, about why it takes so long to build anything anymore. It takes so much money, so much time. And the second part of the question is, Ben, if you win or when you win, what can you do as a member of the council to address the problem of just taking so unbelievably long to get anything built anymore?
Well, I'll let Matt go first so he can tell me what the answer is.
There's multiple aspects to that kind of question. I think one thing that Ben talked about at the top of the event was a need for a council that asks difficult questions about the contracting process, for example, right? And what is up? Because it's huge. I've lived in the city for 18 years. Now you can tell I live by 14th Street, and they did actually a really good redesign of the sidewalks and where the buses are located and the bike lane and stuff. But it took forever, right? And some of that was a consultation process where, maybe it just should have been more expeditious. But the actual hard construction was just really slow. And it's just obvious as a citizen that something is up. That the people who are hired to do that work just are not working as efficiently as some construction crews that we have seen in our lives that are working, right? And you need, why is that exactly? I'm not certain, right? And it's you need somebody who's going to kick the tires on that and see what's going on, because people make a living doing this kind of stuff. And just right over here, right? I was walking up the stairs on the metro, and so the escalator's closed. Well, how long is it going to close for? 22 months. To fix an escalator? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not an escalator repair person. Sure. But that seems odd. You've never seen building this way. So something has happened. Sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I don't think the answer is to have Elon Musk create another company to solve it. But the escalator company. I think I sort of alluded to this, but corruption is a problem in DC. It is a problem. And it's not, I think that there are various forms of corruption. And, some of it is people paying people money, right? That may or may not be happening. But it's also just a culture. This is my buddy. He was a council member, now he's a lobbyist. He represents these people. I'm the funnel that no big contract with. And so then we get things we have a sports betting act. that doesn't work on, one of the biggest sporting events of the year. How did that happen? Well, maybe we should have asked questions about that. Maybe we should have thought about whether we had the right contract in place. And, that goes to people not wanting to ask uncomfortable questions. It goes to some things that are hard to fix about a one-party city or a city in general. There are only so many people based here who do certain things, and so that does lead to certain kind of insular dynamics. But the council could do more, right? And a lot of people talk about finding fat in the budget, but we know some of the fat is pretty obvious because they had a whole debate about it, and then they still went ahead and approved the no-bid contract because there wasn't going to be much blowback for it. And no one really made a mistake about it on the council. And you see that in many other things too. So I think that's one thing. But I would like to know, metro expansion or metro sort of generally, purple line. We talk about or the maglev train and the expense involved in some of the not just the train part, but the kind of building into the district. It is true that it costs a lot more to build a tunnel in America than it does in other parts of the world. Why? I know you talked about it, so I'm curious.
Well, so obviously there hasn't actually been a rail construction project in the district, quite some time now. So we don't quite know, right? But if you look at the Silver Line process, which happened in Virginia, it's been a real catastrophe. And I think there's a group at NYU Marion Center who got funding to go to sort of take a serious look at transit construction costs in general. And one of the things they noticed, that if you zoom out, Silver Line is about global first world standards, an average cost project. But it's above ground. Right? So for above ground, they're costing on average what costs a gigaton, right? And they're years behind schedule. And some of that is just a basic question of project management, right? There's nobody at Lomada who has overseen a project like that in the past. But they didn't hire somebody who was okay, they oversaw an amazing project in some other cities, so they're going to be our in-house design and project management team. Instead they say, well, we don't have the capacity to do this design and management in-house, so we're going to hire a consultant who's going to do the contract. And that doesn't work, right? If something is important, you have to build the capacity to do it in-house. And if you don't have the scale to do that, you need to partner with other agencies to say, well, we're going to have a consortium, where we're going to have in-house design and management systems. But ultimately, you need somebody who works for the agency whose job it is to figure out what's a good way to do this. Because the consultants, there may be people here who do consulting further, but if the incentives are not properly aligned, there's nobody who's crushing it in mega project consulting in the United States of America, where you can just say, well, we're going to hire them, right? You got to say, well, in Boston, they had this Green Line extension, and initially it was a catastrophe, but now they parked it as okay outcome, but that's pretty good, right? If you can get those guys and say, take what you learned there, and have us start it okay, and bring it to actually good, that would be great. Instead, we just went straight to catastrophe.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about the capacity point is it speaks to the one-off way that we approach these projects, right? We should be thinking about building out the metro system, because it's not built out, right? There are places. Lower Park is one of the densest parts of DC, and it's 3 miles from a metro station. That's not good. That's not a well-functioning transit system. And I'm not saying that's the next line that we should build, but if you don't have the capacity as part of the system, then you can't quickly kind of move to that as the next step, right? You have the technical expertise that manage it. Yeah.
Right, in theory, there should always be a plan.
Yes.
That's this is our 100-year metro expansion plan, and here's the order in which we'd like to do things. And then, funding is available or not available. You have to be constantly reevaluating the plan. You say, okay, so something has changed. we alter this. But, when funding for expansions becomes available, you want to be in a position to say, well, we have a sound plan from the standpoint of network design, from our understanding of the geology. Because part of the issue with the Silver Line is it's creating these capacity problems at Roslyn. And that's because it was just a Virginia project, I guess, as it is conceptualized. But it wasn't integrated with any bigger vision of what are we trying to do here. So, we've got to look at where could we use more capacity in the city, how would that go? I mean, yes, it's pretty pie in the sky and pretty theoretical, but you want to be working on it so that you're able to execute in a real kind of way instead of, filling half a car line and it's going anywhere. And,
Yeah, no. To this point, if you go to my Instagram, which you all should, or my Facebook, then for Ward 3, you'll see I have a post up there. WMATA, they published, when they were talking about expanding having and creating a Georgetown station, the map that they created to show metro expansion, it's just an arrow kind of pointing up. It's not a line, it's just, it could go this way, it could go that way. And you look at the map and you go, well, that's Wisconsin Avenue, so I guess they mean that it'll connect up to Fentontown. But they don't say that, it's kind of going nowhere. And that, I think, this speaks to me very much.
Okay, so just and on the topic of transportation, just was wondering, well, a small two-part question. The first, just on the topic of a Wisconsin Avenue metro line, just where your vision for where it would start and end up would be, since I know that it mentions the going down to Georgetown, but just where it would go after that.
Sure.
And also just was wondering that how would you use just your influence on the council to try and speed up just some of the delays that we've had recently on just turning the metro to normal with the just derailment and also with the impending 8-month closure on the yellow line?
Yeah. So, on the first question, I'm going to kind of punt it a little bit. I think, I know that there are some geological constraints, as I understand it, in Georgetown that makes it at least a little more complicated to build a tunnel there. It's not just that people didn't want a metro station, there is some sort of technical issue. So I don't know where the station will be, but I think logically, if you were just look at it from an economic perspective and housing perspective, you would have a stop by the Cathedral Commons area, you would have a stop at Wilbur Park. That's basically the same distance as the different red line stops are from each other, about a mile and a half, and then you would end at Georgetown. And then that would, I guess, probably connect over, but that would be my answer. On WMATA, it's you see this, and Matt, I'm sure you would hear this, you see this in other contexts with these regional transit agencies, that they are necessary because it's a regional thing, but they're answerable to no one and answerable to everyone, and so that creates certain problems. And so, the council's oversight is limited at a certain level, right? We do have a say, but we're one of several, and ultimately, it's not up to us, right? So that is a challenge. I think the key to it is making sure that the council is doing that, basic function is being interested in these things, right? Just because you don't have as much influence as you might like, it doesn't mean you don't have influence, right? We are the key part of the system. The other thing is that we can do things, this is maybe less true about the metro line, the metro rail, and more true the bus, but there are things that the council can do to speed up some of this stuff, to make the lines run better with their own money, or to build the streetcar, to build a I talk about a home rule transit network to fill in gaps, because waiting on WMATA, that's, it's going to take decades to build a metro line, right? Unless things radically change. But, we could redeploy the circulator, we could think about the streetcar as not just something that is laughed at by people who are skeptical of it. Streetcars exist in the world and they're incredible alternative forms of transportation. And why not build that? Palisades neighborhood was a streetcar neighborhood. That's how it was designed. It's not a crazy idea. So I think that is the other answer to it. It's a slightly different thing. And we need to look for the things that we can do within our complete control and do them while we pressure them on. But it is a challenge.
I think, just one thing we need in politics is people who will be serious about trying to seek out technical advice on some of these kinds of questions. That, there is a real, but also science to route planning and networks and things like that. And oftentimes, I think things have gotten done. I mean, it's interesting because there's so many policy knowledgeable people within the District of Columbia, but there's often not a real effort to tap that expertise when it comes to some of these kinds of questions about, how should we do it? Well, modern governance is an interesting subject. I don't know. I'm talking out here. I somewhat question the idea that it actually needs to be a multi-jurisdictional governance, right? If you look at Paris, right, the metro is an instrumentality of the city. Even though it extends outside the city boundaries, but service is provided on a contract basis, where essentially you say, look, we need some subsidy to run it out there, but there's still like a unified point of political responsibility for actually managing the agency. I don't know if the district would want to take that on or not, but it's inherently weird because a lot of metro service is in Virginia. But very little of Virginia is served by metro. So you have this, it's just never going to be make-or-break for the governor of Virginia, whether or not they have good ideas about, rolling stock acquisition. But it's critically important to us that agency be run properly. And, one way or another, right, the district needs to accept responsibility for the fact that we kind of will rise or fail on the strength of whether the transportation system for the metro area works.
Yes.
And particularly the Republican administration in Richmond can afford to sort of be different.
Sure.
And we.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. To move us off a little bit with the transit fantasy planner topic. I don't have kids. I don't know a lot about the child care issue very much, but as I understand it, the district passed a law that says you need to have these minimum educational requirements to become a preschool teacher or to be a steward of the children who are in preschool. Could you take me through your thoughts on whether that was a good or bad idea, and if you don't support it, whether you would repeal it, and if you do support it, why you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, so I'm going to let Matt go first, because I think we disagree on this. So it's not
I'll just say I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of initiatives that push up the structural cost of child care. Obviously you want people to be in as high quality program as possible, but I don't want to raise the bar to the point where then people can't think of the system at all. So I don't know. I want to hear how do we actually fix this?
Yeah.
You can't just say well, it's all got to be amazing, but then then where do people actually go?
Yeah. No, look, sorry, I knew what it was. You actually dialed it down a little bit. Once I premised that,
It can't be helpful.
I think it is true, and it is there's this tension there that you want obviously to have high quality child care centers, and it is a problem that we don't have consistent quality child care centers across the district or across the country, and frequently it's low income kids or in centers where they're not receiving high quality care. And the other thing is that it's hard to understand how to help a child develop. They don't seem to be doing a lot, but they're actually doing a lot of things in their brain, and you there is all this science, all this research on it, and it doesn't, getting that from academia to educators is incredibly impactful when it happens. You go to like an early childhood center that's like connected to a Department of Education at a university, you'll see that the result of that, when people are implementing, the best science and the best research, that's expensive, and people aren't paid a living wage. And so one of the things that happens currently is that people will get the education requirements, and then now they have a degree or they have some certificates, they're now qualified for a better paying job, and then they leave. That is a thing that can happen, right? So I think it's right to be skeptical about raising the cost of childcare if you aren't doing anything else. And so that is why I think the problem with the birth to three funding mechanism is exactly this issue, is that it doesn't solve the salary question and the job question, because it's very convoluted and people aren't going to still aren't going to be making at that salary in the public school system. They're not going to be attracting the same caliber of talent and be able to justify having the same standards, right? So that's why I think long term we need to make the public school system include the toddler mechanism, because that answers that question. They're public school teachers. They're paid by the public school system. They have to have college degrees. They have to meet the requirements. They have to be trained on it. Now, is that you have to have a high standards that are making it possible for people to work into the system? No. And I think and there is some recognition about how can we structure those requirements so people can get them over time, and get them for free, right? And make it something that isn't a burden on getting the job and doing the job. But I don't know. I worry a little bit about going in the opposite direction. So that's where I land. I think it's important to be cautious about it because there already isn't enough available, so you can't destabilize the system by suddenly pushing people out who are doing the job now. And one can't underestimate the importance of having experience. If you've been doing it for 2 decades, you probably know a lot about how to handle kids. And so you can't have the mentality that they're not qualified. But I don't know, I think there's a balance there, and perhaps we're not doing it currently, but yeah, that's my answer.
Thanks very much for the presentation, to both of you actually. I am not familiar with the platform. I have to confess I have not gone on the website.
That's okay.
But in the meantime, could you tell us specific examples of what you would advocate the council to do in order to increase both the volume of housing, the density of housing, and also affordable housing? What specific acts can the council actually do that would bring about significant change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say, and I think we'll take a few more questions, or one or two more questions after this. You should go to my website. That's my first answer, benburban.com. I think there are a few things. So on the comprehensive plan, which when it comes up in the future, so comprehensive plan is not is a piece of the puzzle in terms of how dense we can build. And we just recently had a discussion about amending it, and parts of the district got upzoned in order to build higher. There's going to be more discussion about that if we rewrite it again. And so from my perspective, I've said, Wisconsin Avenue, Connecticut Avenue, Massachusetts Avenue, my starting assumption is that both sides, so not just some parts that are already dense, but both sides of the street, all along the stretch, should be upzoned to at least, I think it's moderate density. Now, medium and moderate don't mean the same thing as they would to a regular person. But up that level, and it's on my website. And then on MacArthur Boulevard, it's another one that I think should go up on both sides. Then from that assumption, we can talk about exceptions from there, instead of doing what we did last time, which is, well, we're not going to change anything except maybe this block, maybe that block, maybe that block. That's not the way to do it, right? So that's one answer for building densely around metro stations. The other thing that I think is crucial is minimum lot size and talking about the size of homes that we can build. So there's a whole big discussion about single-family zoning and whether we want to ban single-family zoning. This is a big topic on the left in DC, and I understand really where it's coming from, but we're far from there. It is illegal to build a row home in parts of Ward 3 because the lot size the requirements don't allow it. You can't build houses that small. And that's a thing that the council can change. And the Ward 3 council member, I think, saying we want to change that in Ward 3 matters because people on the council in other parts of DC, Ward 2, Ward 4, Ward 6, they look at here, they don't understand politics here. They think it's kind of like Bethesda. They don't get it. And they defer inordinately to what the council member says is politically feasible. So I think that's important. The other thing that I'd say is something the council can do and should do. So there's funding for planning processes underway on some of the big avenues. I think we need to do that, appropriate the funds, the planning process, not there, it's already happening, but direct it to neighborhoods and talk about where we can build gentle density in neighborhoods and how we can make it work. I think there are many places where there are duplexes, there are 4-unit buildings that exist already because when they built the neighborhood 100 years ago, that was legal, and so they exist, they're historic, but you can't do it anymore there. We should talk about that, identify those places, have that process, and that's a thing that the council can pay for. The other thing that I think, right across from us, we have a library. We have public buildings across the city that all of them the assumption should be, in my view, that all of them should be redeveloped with housing as part of the building. And maybe there's exceptions where it's not safe or it's historic or whatever, but that should be the assumption. And having a bill to require a master plan on that process to say, what will this library look like when it's done with its useful life? Or do we need a new police station over on Idaho Avenue, which I think it looks like we might. It doesn't look like it's such a great building. Can we redo it now and build some housing on it? And there's also the great thing about that. I worked on these projects when I was a lawyer in law school. I interned for the Brooklyn Public Library. And if you go up to Brooklyn, you'll see some of the libraries that have housing on top. And what's amazing about that, from the library's perspective, is it costs them nothing to get a world-class facility built with everything they could possibly want in a library. It was paid for by the development process. And they had inclusionary zoning units. So it wasn't like it was just a market rate paradise and no affordable units. They did all of those things. And it costs the taxpayers nothing. In some sense, depends how you see it, they made a profit. So that, I think, is part of the camp.
Yeah, the West End Library also.
Yes.
Yeah.
One more? Yeah.
Thank you both. My name is Victoria. I want to go back to childcare for a minute. I love the idea of expanding public school down practically to birth. That's amazing. There's this national conversation happening at the federal level right now about whether to fund preschool or fund parents. Just give parents cash, either as an addition to or instead of. And I'm curious what that looks like at the DC city level, because it sounds like we're probably going to get neither one from the federal level anytime soon. So would you support just paying parents in addition to your plan, or if you could if there wasn't the appetite maybe in the short term to expand public school all the way down, is that something you would look at as a short-term stopgap? And I'm also interested in your thoughts nationally and locally as well.
Yeah. I want to go first.
So, federal contracts, I lean toward sort of cash solutions because I think, the federal government's core competency is sort of cutting checks to people. Actually, you see it right in federal preschool plans. Nobody's plan was like the federal government is going to build preschools, right? They're using these intermediaries, and some of it is very murky and complicated, and maybe sent by the individuals. The district of Columbia, like, is the kind of government entity that builds, like, we operate many schools. We have built we have funds in the budget to build some new schools. We've built out a grade 4 system. We also have school buildings that are mothballed currently and currently open. So like this is the right level of government to create institutions at. But we also have a tax code, and I think there's probably things that we should do in terms of child tax credit, other kinds of things like that, to support people monetarily. Although I will confess, without being to the weeds of how district taxation business comes to.
Sure. So I mean, I think it's not the answer is maybe not an either or, at a certain level. I'd say, that is kind of what the Birth to 3 plan is, right? It is, capping it by giving subsidies. Sometimes I think it's going to be delivered through the tax code, but it's essentially, that's just a choice about how you deliver the check. So the answer would be yes in the short term. And I think there is a value in thinking about providing support to parents and families to deal with those expenses. But I think the long-term solution should be the bold one, and we should be talking about it. And wouldn't it be great if the District of Columbia, which all these people outside DC like to deride DC, let's be a leader on this again, on childcare, and show the nation that we can do it, and do it in a way that isn't pie in the sky. Because it really isn't, especially if we do it the way we did pre-K, which is thoughtfully using public facilities that already exist in a slow expansion. But so I think we're done with time. But I'll be around afterwards. I don't know what that schedule is, but I want to thank everybody for coming. It's an extraordinary honor to have you guys here. Privilege to have Matt here and get his perspective. You sound just like he does when he's in my ears on the podcast.
I just want to close with some exhortations. I thank everybody for coming out here. I thank you for supporting Ben. I think it's a really great idea to talk to your friends and peers, post on your social media. If anybody knows DC, these are pretty low salience elections. They don't get a lot of publicity. Your vote makes a difference. Your financial contribution makes a difference. But you are the best messenger for these kind of things. There's not going to be a huge TV ad campaign about this. And there are also a lot of weird, tipping points, right? In the endorsement process, people are going to want to back a candidate that they think is viable. And the only way of knowing who's viable is through very hazy, ecological inference. So the more active you are, the more likely it is that other people support Ben, you hit the tipping points, and you unlock the possibility of real change. I think what he said about just the voice, there was a race out in San Francisco earlier this week, and the pro-housing candidate won, and he won big, and that's going to change politics throughout that region. I think he will do good things in the legislature. There's also a signal to everybody else. It would be a huge deal to have a pro-housing council member from this ward, and to say that and make that case to the folks that if you are engaged enough to come out here, you are somebody who people in your networks are looking to for leadership on questions like, who should I vote for in the weird off-year primary? Be that advocate.
Thank you for saying that. I talk to people who they're like, I'm running for DC Council in Ward 3, and their response is, I really like Mary Shea. I'm sorry. Right? And I get that a lot. People aren't following these things, and the number of voters is not going to be high. So it is exactly the. Please get a yard sign if you want one. If you have a place to put it, please volunteer. And I think to this point, if you're willing to host a house party or a conversation, you can do it by Zoom, or you do it on your lawn. It can be 5 people, 10 people. That's the way to win an election like this. Talking to people, engaging them. Absolutely. And money is important, but public financing is a kind of incredible thing this election. It's not going to be the barrier that it is typically. But getting the word out in a 2-month election, that's tough. So any help you can do on that, would be awesome. Yes. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.